My name is Elise Warren, and 6 months ago I learned what silence is really worth. Not the calm kind, the kind that cuts. The kind you hold between your teeth at a dinner table while your husband laughs with his parents about how nice it is you're finally trying to find work. That night started as a test, but it ended as a lesson. James texted me on a Tuesday afternoon dinner with my parents this weekend. Be ready by 6. Dress simple. They appreciate modesty. Modesty. His favorite word lately. I stared at the message thumb hovering over the screen. He didn't mean modest. He meant, don't outshine them. Because the truth was, I wasn't modest. Not anymore. I never told James I made 30 grand a month. He thought my design studio was a quiet little side gig, something to keep me busy. He never asked why I stopped worrying about bills or why I never touched his credit card again. Maybe he didn't want to know. The drive to his parents' estate was shorter than I remembered. The closer we got, the tighter my chest felt. James adjusted his cufflinks, glancing at me like a project he wasn't sure was presentable. You look nice, he said. Thanks, I replied. They're old-fashioned. Just be yourself. Which version? I asked lightly. He didn't answer. The Whitcombs' house loomed at the end of the street, 3 stories of polished brick and expectation. The kind of home that whispered pedigree. When the butler opened the door, the air smelled like lemon polish and old judgment. Louise Whitcomb greeted me with a smile sharp enough to slice fruit. Elise? How lovely to see you again. It's been too long. Work's been busy, I said. Oh. Her eyebrows arched. James mentioned you were between clients. Of course he did. The table was set for 6. Harold Whitcomb at the head, Louise at the other, James beside me, too close to feel safe. Conversation flowed like wine, expensive and heavy. So Elise Harold began cutting his roast precisely, still doing those art things. Design, I corrected gently. Branding, product work, some interiors. Ah, he smiled thinly. Creative. Must be nice not to worry about income. James chuckled, eyes on his plate. She's passionate about it, he said, tone warm but dismissive. We're lucky I can cover the important stuff. The table laughed. Even Louise. I smiled too. That same smile, I'd perfected, the kind that said, you win for now. The jokes came in layers, polite, cutting, relentless. How modern marriages work. How some women don't understand what it means to build security. Louise refilled my wine. You'll have children soon, won't you? That'll give you purpose. I wanted to tell her I had purpose. That the company I built, Red Wing Studio, was designing spaces for Fortune 500s and paying for half their silverware. But I didn't. Instead, I said, we'll see. James smiled at that. He thought my restraint was gratitude. After dinner, Louise asked James to help Harold in the study. I offered to help clean up. She waved me off. Nonsense, you're our guest. When she left the room, I carried the dishes to the kitchen. That's when I heard it through the open pantry door, voices low and intimate. James. She means well. She's just idealistic. Thinks her little studio will take off. Harold. You can't let that get out of hand. Independence breeds resentment. Louise. You'll have to keep her grounded, or she'll embarrass you. James laughed softly. Don't worry, she'll do what I ask. My hand froze on the dish. They weren't cruel, not exactly. They were just confident in their hierarchy, their order, their world where men led and women followed quietly. They didn't know I'd already rewritten the rules. When we got home that night, James loosened his tie and sighed. Well, that wasn't so bad. I stared at him. You didn't hear them. Hear what them? In the pantry. Talking about me. He frowned. Elise, you're reading into it. My parents can be blunt. No, I said, voice low. It's your way. You told them I'd do what you ask. He blinked, thrown off. It was a joke. No, James? It was a confession. He exhaled. You're overreacting. Why can't you just enjoy a nice dinner without finding problems? Because the dinner wasn't about food. It was about control. Somewhere between the pot roast and the laughter, I realized I was done pretending to be smaller than I was. That night, when James fell asleep, I opened my laptop. The Red Wing dashboard glowed in the dark numbers client's projections. All real. All mine. I stared at the account balance. $182. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. If they thought I'd built nothing, they were about to find out what nothing could do. A message popped up from my assistant update on the Whitcomb project. They're still interested in the boutique rebrand. I smiled. The Whitcomb family owned half the retail district downtown, and I apparently owned their next campaign. Maybe the universe was feeling dramatic. As I closed my laptop, I looked at James sleeping beside me. His face was peaceful, smug, even in rest. I realized then that revenge didn't have to be loud. It could be subtle, elegant, designed with the same precision as a brand identity. Tomorrow I'd start the redesign of Whitcomb & Cohen interiors. I'd call it the dinner test. Because if they wanted a modest little designer, I'd give them one until the unveiling. And that's when they'd see who they'd been laughing at all along. The next morning, sunlight crept across the room, soft and pale, like it had no idea it was shining on a battlefield. James was still asleep, arm flung over his face. He looked peaceful, harmless even. I studied him for a moment the way you might study a stranger who used to mean something. Then I got up quietly and started the coffee. That same morning, I called my assistant Kara. Push up the Whitcomb rebrand, I said. We're launching phase 1 next month. Isn't that the family your husband? She started, then caught herself. Yes, I said, smiling. That family. Kara laughed softly. You're playing with fire. Then I'll design the flames. I spent the next week pretending everything was normal. Breakfast together, half conversations about the news, a shared bed that felt like 2 separate countries. Every night after he fell asleep, I built the presentation for Whitcomb & Co. on my laptop. Their logo, once a dated cursive relic, became sharp, modern, minimalist. I stripped away every trace of pretension and gave it elegance, subtle power, the kind of look that said old money learning to stay relevant. James had no idea. At dinner one night, he glanced at me over his wine. You've been quiet lately. Just work, I said. He smirked. From your little studio? Something like that. He leaned back. You know, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time you let me help. I could look over your books, get you better contracts. I smiled. That's sweet, but I'm good. Elise. I'm serious, he said, tone shifting. You can't just keep freelancing forever. There's no stability in that. Then I'll have to build my own. He set the glass down harder than he meant to. Why do you always have to make things sound like a challenge? Because you keep mistaking partnership for permission, I said quietly. He didn't reply. He just stared at me, and in that silence I saw it, the fear. Not of me, but of what I represented, a woman he couldn't manage. A week later, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. This is Harold Whitcomb, the voice said. I hear you're redesigning our brand. I froze for half a second. That's right, Mr. Whitcomb. I didn't realize you ran the firm, he said, his tone polite but cautious. James mentioned you were a freelancer. I used to be, I said. Now I own Red Wing Studio. We've handled projects for Sinclair Holdings, Apex Retail, and half your competitors. You'll get the first drafts by Friday. A long pause. Then, well, he said, I suppose I underestimated you. You're not the first. After hanging up, I smiled. The Whitcombs were too proud to cancel. They'd see the work before they saw the truth. And by then, it would be too late. That weekend, Louise invited us to dinner again. A small family evening, she said on the phone, her voice sugary. Just us. I knew what that meant. She wanted to reassert the hierarchy. So I agreed. Of course. I'd love to. Saturday came. I wore a simple black dress, elegant but unassuming. The drive felt different this time. Not dread, not nerves. Strategy. James hummed beside me, completely unaware that the air between us had changed temperature. The Whitcombs greeted us with the same polished charm. Louise hugged me lightly. "You look lovely, dear." "Thank you," I said. "You too." Dinner began the same as before. Pot roast, small talk, the hum of self-satisfaction. But the rhythm broke when Harold casually asked, "So Elise, this Red Wing company, how do you know them?" James's fork froze. I kept my expression even. Intimately, I said, "I founded it." Louise blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" James turned to me slowly. "You what?" "I own Red Wing Studio," I said, voice calm. "We're leading your rebrand." The silence was delicious. James's face flushed. You never said." "You never asked," I replied. Harold cleared his throat, suddenly uneasy. "That's impressive. I didn't realize." "I know," I said. "But I thought it would be fun to see how you'd treat someone you assumed had nothing." Louise's jaw tightened. "You mean you lied to us?" "I played along," I said. "You wanted simple. I gave you simple." James slammed his hand on the table. "You made a fool of me." I leaned forward. "No, James. You did that yourself." For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Louise's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Harold looked like he'd swallowed a stone. Finally, Louise spoke. "I misjudged you." "I know," I said. "But maybe next time you'll judge less and listen more." I stood. Dinner was lovely, really. James didn't follow me when I walked out. I think part of him couldn't move, not out of shock, but out of realization. Because the game he thought he was winning was already over. And this time, I was the one who'd written the rules. The next morning, James didn't come down for breakfast. The coffee pot was still warm, his cup untouched, the house unnaturally quiet. I sat at the table, scrolling through my inbox, pretending not to notice the tension stretching across the walls like wire. At exactly 8:12, he came downstairs. Hair-damp shirt, unbuttoned, his tie draped around his neck like a noose he hadn't decided whether to tighten. "About last night," he began. I didn't look up. "What about it?" He hesitated. "You embarrassed my parents." I corrected a misunderstanding, I said, voice even. "One that benefited you for too long." He let out a dry laugh. "That's what this is about, power. You couldn't just let me have a normal evening." "Normal," I repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what you call being patronized over pot roast?" His tone hardened. "You humiliated me." I set my phone down. "No, James, I surprised you. There's a difference." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You've been keeping secrets." "I kept boundaries," I said. His jaw tightened. "Don't twist this. You lied. By omission. You assumed I was small, and I let you. That's not lying, that's research." His nostrils flared. "You think this makes you superior?" "I think it makes me awake." We stared at each other for a long, brittle moment. Finally, he said, "You made me look like a fool." "No," I said quietly. "You proved you were one." He left without another word. The door closed softly, almost politely, and the silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. For the rest of that week, he was distant. Not angry, strategic. Polite texts. Short answers. The kind of quiet that meant planning. I stayed focused. Red Wing's office was humming. We were preparing. The Whitcomb & Co. were unveiling a full-scale launch with media coverage. The new branding was bold but timeless, a mirror held up to the family's own hypocrisy. Kara leaned against my desk, sipping coffee. "You really think they'll show?" "They'll come," I said. "They can't resist publicity." "And your husband?" "He'll follow the money," I said. "He always does." When Friday arrived, the event space downtown was buzzing with staff and contractors. White lights, black velvet curtains, champagne on ice. The new Whitcomb logo gleamed above the stage, a single crimson line, elegant, powerful, stripped of ornament. Louise and Harold arrived first, their expressions controlled, but tight. James came 5 minutes later in a navy suit that looked like armor. Elise Louise said with a tight smile, "This is quite the spectacle." "Thank you," I said. "You taught me appearances matter." James's eyes flicked to me, calculating. "You didn't tell me this was tonight." "I didn't know I needed to." He exhaled through his nose, a habit he had when trying not to lose control. The presentation began. I took the stage calm and clear. The lights dimmed. Images flashed behind me, before and after comparisons, renderings of stores, clean geometric layouts. My voice carried easily through the microphone. "Whitcomb & Coers has a legacy of excellence," I said, "but legacy without evolution becomes vanity. What you'll see today is not just a design, it's an identity reborn." Polite applause followed. Cameras flashed. Louise's posture softened, pride creeping past her restraint. Harold even nodded approvingly. But James was stone. Afterward, during the mingling, a business reporter approached us. "Fascinating presentation, Mrs. Warren. Your firm's valuation must be impressive." James blinked. "Valuation?" I smiled. "Red Wing's estimated worth is around $4 million as of this quarter." The reporter's eyebrows shot up. "Remarkable. You must be very proud, Mr. Warren." James forced a laugh. "Of course." The reporter moved on. He turned to me, eyes dark. $4 million. "Numbers aren't lies," I said. He lowered his voice. "You've been building this behind my back." "Alongside you," I corrected. "You just never looked sideways." Louise approached, cheeks flushed from champagne. "Elise, darling, that was extraordinary. You've outdone yourself." Harold nodded stiffly. "We'll be in touch about expanding the contract." "Thank you," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but his gaze avoided mine. They understood now not just my talent, but my leverage. When they left, James stayed behind, silent. We were the last two in the hall. He finally spoke. "You planned this? Every bit of it?" "Yes," I said simply. "To humiliate me? To free myself." He stepped closer. "You think you can just walk away from this marriage?" "I already have," I said. He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You think you're the first woman to outsmart a man. You'll find out what happens when you burn bridges." "Maybe," I said, "but I built mine first." He left, his footsteps echoing through the empty hall. The next day, a courier delivered an envelope to my office. Inside was a formal letter, notice of legal review for shared assets. No explanation, no apology, just war written in legalese. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. Kara glanced at me from across the room. "Trouble." "Expected," I said, "but manageable." "You sure?" I smiled faintly. "Completely." Because I knew something James didn't. Red Wing was fully incorporated before our marriage. Every contract, every client, every cent mine. Still, I wasn't naive. Men like James don't go down gracefully. They flail, they scheme, they bruise on their way out. That night, my lawyer called. "He's contesting the prenup," she said. I laughed quietly. "Of course he is." "Do you want to settle or fight?" "Neither," I said. "I want him to see what losing really looks like." 2 weeks later, James called. His voice was clipped, cautious. "We need to talk." "Then talk," I said. "In person." I hesitated, then agreed. We met at the same cafe where we'd had our first date years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was already there when I arrived, coffee half drunk, his posture tight. "Elise," he said, voice low. "This can't go on. The lawyers, the headlines. You're making me look like a villain." "Maybe stop acting like one," I said. He rubbed his temple. "You really hate me that much?" I studied him. "No, I don't hate you. I just finally love myself more." He looked away. For a second I thought he might cry, but then he straightened and the mask returned. "You'll regret this," he said. "I already did," I said softly, "for years." I stood, left a few bills on the table, and walked out into the cold. For the first time in a long time, the air felt honest. The morning after that cafe meeting, I woke up before dawn. The house was quiet, still carrying the ghost of his presence, the faint cologne, the creak in the hallway where his shoe always caught. I stood there for a moment listening to the hum of the refrigerator and realized the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. Red Wing was expanding fast. The Whitcomb campaign had gone viral after launch week. Business Daily called it a masterclass in corporate reinvention, and requests were flooding in. I barely had time to think between client calls and interviews. But sometimes, between the chaos, I'd catch myself wondering if James ever read those headlines. One morning, Kara burst into my office, eyes wide. "You need to see this." She handed me her phone, a gossip article. Former investment analyst James Warren accused of insider trading inquiry pending. I stared at it, my stomach cold. "Is it true?" Kara nodded. "They say it's tied to a deal he brokered for Whitcomb Retail last year." I leaned back, silent. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had mocked me for being too small was crumbling under its own greed. My phone rang that afternoon. Unknown number. I almost ignored it until I heard his voice. "Elise." I didn't speak. "Elise, please," he said, quiet but desperate. "They're investigating me. I need your help." I closed my eyes. "Why call me?" "Because you know people now," he said. "You're connected. You could talk to someone, maybe, I don't know, clarify things." I let the silence stretch until it felt cruel. "You remember the last thing you said to me?" I asked. He hesitated. "You'll regret this." "Right," I said. "And yet, here you are." "Elise, please," he said, voice cracking. "I'm not asking for money. I'm drowning here." Something twisted in my chest. He sounded smaller, stripped of the arrogance that used to fill every sentence. For a second, I saw the version of him I married, ambitious, funny, a little lost. Before the condescension hardened around him like armor. "I can't fix what you broke," I said softly. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he whispered. "But you did," I said. "And you never cared until it started costing you." He went quiet. "Goodbye, James." I hung up before he could answer. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched below, lights shimmering like they were alive, each one a tiny reminder of how much I'd rebuilt. But underneath that calm, something unexpected stirred. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Sadness, maybe. Because endings, even deserved ones, still hurt. The next day, a letter arrived, not from him, but from Louise. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Elise, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that what you did opened my eyes. I used to think strength meant control, but I see now that real strength is letting go. Harold retired. We sold the company shares. We'll be fine. James, well, I hope he learned something from this. You were right to stand your ground. I wish I had. Louise." I folded the letter carefully, placed it in my desk drawer. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. 3 months passed. I was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship panel downtown. Normally I'd say no, but something in me said yes this time. Maybe I needed to hear myself say the story out loud, not for revenge, but for truth. The auditorium was full. Faces of every age, curious, expectant, tired, hopeful. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the microphone and took a deep breath. "My name is Elise Warren," I began. "I used to think power meant being louder, richer, smarter. But it's not. Power is knowing when to stop apologizing for being capable." The room was silent. I told them about the dinner, the whispers, the laughter. About pretending to be small just to see how people would treat me. And about the moment I decided I was done shrinking. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Some people stood. A few cried. Afterward, women came up to me, strangers, but not really. One said, "I've been Elise for 10 years. Thank you for showing me the ending doesn't have to be tragedy." I smiled and told her it's not the ending, it's the reveal. Later that night, I walked home alone. The city was quieter than usual. Somewhere behind me, a bus hissed to a stop. In a shop window, I caught my reflection calm, older, unflinching. At home, I lit a candle on the kitchen counter and opened my journal. I hadn't written in weeks. Red Wing 6.2M valuation this quarter. Expansion to Seattle confirmed. James unknown. Me free. I stared at those 3 words, me free. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like arrival. I poured another glass of wine, leaned against the counter, and let the quiet wrap around me like music. For the first time in years, there was no plan, no test, no game, just peace. And that more than any headline, any victory was the real ending. Or maybe the real beginning. 6 months later, the world had shifted again, not in the dramatic way life tends to collapse in movies, but in the slow, deliberate rhythm of rebuilding. Red Wing had grown into something solid, something that no longer felt like rebellion, but purpose. The staff had doubled. Kara now ran operations with her quiet efficiency, and every morning when I walked through those glass doors, there was a moment of awe that still hadn't faded. The girl who once smiled politely through humiliation had built a company where women spoke without fear of interruption. I still lived in the same house, though. Not because I couldn't move, but because I wanted to own every corner that had once been shadowed by someone else's voice. The dining table where I used to sit across from James had become my workspace. The lemon polish scent was gone, replaced by coffee and ink, and the faint sweetness of lilies Kara sent every month, just because. Sometimes when I passed the mirror in the hallway, I would catch myself mid-step. I didn't look softer anymore, but I didn't look hard either. Just real. James had disappeared from headlines. The last I heard, the inquiry had quietly ended with fines and a forced resignation. No jail, of course, privilege never dissolves that easily, but the industry no longer wanted his name attached to anything important. I thought about him less than I expected. Not with anger or longing, just curiosity. He had been a chapter, and now I was pages ahead. One morning, I was reviewing proposals when Kara knocked on my door. "You've got mail," she said. Old-fashioned handwritten. Inside the envelope was a short letter from Harold Whitcomb. "Elise Louise told me you spoke at that conference last spring." She cried watching the recording. "I did too, though I won't admit it anywhere else. I was wrong about you. About a lot of things. Thank you for showing my wife and me that our daughter deserves a different kind of marriage than the one we modeled. I hope you're well. H. Whitcomb." I sat back in my chair and exhaled. It wasn't an apology I'd asked for, but it was the one that mattered. The kind that doesn't erase history, just acknowledges it. That night I called Louise. She sounded older but lighter. "He's calmer now," she said. "And you were right. It took losing control to understand what we never had to begin with." "I'm glad," I said. She paused. "Do you ever miss him?" I thought about that for a long time. Sometimes I said finally. But I think what I really miss is the version of me who still believed I had to earn peace. Louise was quiet, then said softly, "I hope you never do again." Spring turned to summer and Red Wing signed its biggest contract yet, a tech conglomerate looking to rebrand under a campaign called "Authenticity is Power." The irony wasn't lost on me. We celebrated in the office with takeout and cheap champagne. Kara climbed onto a chair and raised her glass. To Elise, she said, "For proving that revenge is temporary but self-respect pays dividends." Everyone laughed and cheered. I smiled, embarrassed but grateful. When the noise died down, I went to the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline glowed gold in the evening haze. The air was warm and steady. I took out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at his name, James Warren. For a long time, I just stared at it. Then, for reasons I still can't explain, I typed, "I hope you're okay." I didn't expect an answer. But a few minutes later, the phone buzzed. "I'm trying to be. I hope you're happy, Elise." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted the thread. Because I was. Not the loud, triumphant kind of happy, just the steady kind that doesn't ask for permission. Months later, I found myself on another stage, not at a business panel this time, but at a small storytelling event downtown. The theme was second chances. When it was my turn, I didn't use a script. I just spoke. I once thought silence kept the peace I began. But silence doesn't keep peace. It keeps power in the wrong hands. And sometimes the only way to find yourself is to let the version they love die, so you can meet the one who's been waiting underneath. The room was still. No applause yet, just quiet, breathing people absorbing what I said. I smiled. I used to pretend to be poor to see how they'd treat me. Now I pretend to be nothing at all because when you stop performing, the right people find you. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. Someone else whispered, "Amen." When it ended, the applause came slow but deep. I stepped off stage, heart pounding, not from nerves but from recognition. This was the real twist. Not revenge, not exposure, freedom. Later that night, I went home, kicked off my heels, and stood barefoot in the kitchen. The candlelight flickered against the window, and for a moment I saw my reflection again. Not in the glass, but in the life I'd built. I thought of that first dinner, the smirks, the whispers, the way they said I'd find purpose once I had children. They were half right. I did find purpose, just not the kind they meant. I poured myself a glass of wine and whispered to the empty room, "Here's to the woman who stopped pretending." Then I smiled because somewhere deep down I knew there was another woman out there listening to this story, ready to stop pretending too. If you're her, don't wait for permission. Don't ask for peace. Build it. And when they laugh at you for dreaming too loudly, just smile. Let them. Because one day they'll see what quiet was really for. A year later, the story that had once been my secret became something larger than me. I was invited to speak at Stanford's annual Entrepreneurship Summit. The topic wasn't revenge or success, but authenticity, the kind that costs you something. I remember standing backstage listening to the hum of 1,000 conversations. My hands were steady now. No trembling, no second guessing. Just the calm of a woman who had already survived the worst kind of silence. When they called my name, I walked onto the stage, lights warm against my face. The crowd quieted. I smiled not because I had something to prove, but because I finally didn't. I used to think I had to hide the best parts of myself to make other people comfortable. I began. Once I pretended to be small and they treated me accordingly. It was an experiment, a test. I wanted to see who would value me without the armor of success. The answer was no one. A soft murmur rippled through the room. So I stopped apologizing for wanting more. And I built Red Wing not to prove them wrong, but to prove me right. And it turns out people respect you most when you stop asking them to. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. All I could think about was how far that voice had traveled from the girl whispering in a pantry to the woman commanding a room full of entrepreneurs. After the event, a young woman approached me. Early 20s, nervous, clutching a notebook. "Ms. Warren," she said, "how do you know when it's time to stop forgiving someone who doesn't see your worth?" I smiled, recognizing that tremor in her voice, the same one I'd carried for years. When you realize you've been forgiving them for the same thing I said, over and over, that's when you stop. She nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you." As she walked away, I saw myself in her, that fragile courage, trembling but alive. That night in my hotel room overlooking the bay, I finally opened the small package that had been sitting in my bag for months. Inside was my old wedding ring. I'd kept it tucked away, not because I wanted to remember, but because I hadn't known what to do with it. It wasn't anger that made me drop it into the hotel safe and close the door, it was peace. That chapter didn't need burning. It just needed closure. 3 months later, Red Wing celebrated its 5-year anniversary. We held the event at our new office, exposed brick hanging plants, shelves full of design awards. Kara handed me a glass of champagne. "You realize we're a multi-million-dollar firm now, right?" she said with a grin. I laughed. "Don't remind me. I still get nervous signing paychecks." She raised her glass. "To the quiet revolution." We clinked glasses, and I looked around at the faces of my team: artists, engineers, designers, all of them people who had once been overlooked somewhere else. This wasn't just a company, it was a refuge disguised as success. A few days later, I received an email from a name I hadn't seen in over a year. James Warren. The subject line read, "Thank you." I hovered over it for a long time before opening it. Elise. I wanted to say this before too much time passes. You were right about everything. About me, about what power really is. I'm teaching financial literacy at a community college now. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Maybe that's the first good thing I've done in a long time. I hope you're happy. Truly. James. I stared at the screen, feeling something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not regret. Just acceptance. The kind that comes when the story finally settles into stillness. I hit reply and typed, "I am. I hope you are too." Then I closed the laptop and let the quiet of the evening fill the room. Months passed. Seasons blurred. And one morning, I found myself driving past the old Whitcomb estate on my way to a client meeting. The house looked smaller now, still immaculate, still wrapped in wealth, but smaller somehow, as if time had peeled away its grandeur. At the gate, I saw Louise tending her roses. She looked up and waved. I pulled over. "Elise," she said, walking over, wiping dirt from her gloves. "You look wonderful." "So do you," I said, smiling. We talked for a while about work, travel, small things. Then she grew quiet. "You know," she said softly, "I used to envy you. Not your success, your freedom. You earned it. Most of us never do." I looked at her, at the silver streaks in her hair, at the faint sadness behind her composure. "It's never too late," I said. She smiled wistfully. "Maybe not for the next generation." I nodded, then said goodbye. As I drove away, I thought of her words. Maybe we couldn't rewrite the past, but we could change what the next women believed was possible. That evening, I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the city fade into night. I thought about everything that had led me here. The lies, the laughter, the long silences that used to fill me with doubt. And I realized something: the test had never been about them. It had always been about me. Would I shrink to fit their comfort, or expand to fit my truth? I chose expansion. So if you're listening to this story, if you've ever been underestimated, silenced, or told to be grateful for less, I hope you remember this. You don't owe anyone the smaller version of yourself. And when they tell you you've changed, smile, because that's what growth sounds like to those who never did. If this story made you pause even for a second, share it. Somewhere, another woman is still whispering in her pantry, wondering if her voice matters. Let her know it does. Because it always did. It's been 3 years since the night I walked through that door, the one that started everything. Sometimes when I look back, I can still feel the weight of that moment, the sound of the polished floor under my heels, the stillness before the storm. But time has softened the edges. What once felt like a battle now feels like a story, one I survived and one I own. Red Wing is global now. Offices in New York, Seattle, and London. We work with women-led startups, helping them design their own brands, their own voices. The tagline that sits on every wall reads, "No one can silence what was never asking to be heard." I don't work 12-hour days anymore. I don't chase clients or validation. Most mornings, I walk to work with a coffee in one hand and the sunrise in my eyes. Sometimes I even stop by the small park near the river, the one James and I once visited when we still believed in each other. It's quiet there. The air smells of salt and grass, and the sound of the water reminds me that everything moves forward whether you're ready or not. One Saturday afternoon, I hosted a workshop at Red Wing, free sessions for women starting over. Divorced, laid off, newly single, newly brave. I watched them trickle in, faces guarded but curious. We sat in a circle, no slides, no branding decks. Just voices. One woman, probably in her 50s, said softly, "I gave up everything for a man who said he'd take care of me. Now, I don't even know where to start." I nodded. "Start where he left you," I said. "That's where the story gets good." She smiled through tears. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I said. "It's just worth it." The room went still. Someone exhaled shakily, another whispered, "God, that's true." For the rest of the hour, we didn't talk about business plans or branding. We talked about fear and how it hides behind politeness, about how women are taught to measure worth in apologies. And when it ended, they didn't clap, they hugged, one by one. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the empty office. The lights from the street cast long reflections across the glass walls. I thought of all the women I'd met since the beginning, each one carrying her own version of that dinner, that humiliation, that quiet spark that finally turned into fire. Later that week, I received an email from a publishing house. They wanted to turn my story, The Dinner Test, into a memoir. I hesitated at first. The thought of reliving it all on paper was exhausting. But then I realized it wasn't about me anymore. So I said yes. The book came out 6 months later. The cover was simple, a single red line echoing the Red Wing logo. Inside, I wrote what I had never dared to say aloud back then. We are not made powerful by what we survive. We are made powerful by what we refuse to keep surviving. The book tour was surreal. Bright lights, microphones, people crying during Q&As. But the moment that stayed with me happened in a small bookstore in Portland. After the reading, a young man came up to me. "My mom left my dad last year," he said. "She read your story and it made her believe she wasn't crazy. I just wanted to say thank you." I smiled, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She wasn't crazy," I said. "She was brave." Now sometimes I record small videos, quiet messages for women who stumble across my story online. Not the loud, polished ones with perfect lighting. Just me at home speaking into my phone late at night. One of them went viral. It was only a minute long. If they only love you when you're smaller, it's not love, it's comfort. Don't shrink for anyone. The world's already too small for women who think. The comments flooded in stories, tears, gratitude. I read every one. Some nights I cried too. A few months later, I was invited to give a TED Talk. I almost said no, it felt too big, too polished. But Kara insisted. "You started this by pretending to be poor," she said. "Now tell the world what wealth really is." So I did. The talk was called The Power of Underestimation. I used to believe success was about proving people wrong, I told the audience. But the truth is, the people who underestimate you aren't your problem. They're your confirmation. Every smirk, every doubt, every quiet dismissal, it's a signpost. It tells you where not to shrink. I paused, let the silence breathe. Don't waste time convincing anyone that you're more than they see. Build something so undeniable that they have to look up. The standing ovation felt like thunder. But afterward, when I stepped backstage, I just laughed, because it wasn't triumph I felt. It was peace. Now when I walk into a room, I don't wonder how they'll treat me. I already know how I'll treat myself. And that's the real ending. Not revenge, not applause, not even forgiveness. Just freedom, the quiet kind, the kind you build brick by brick until one day you realize you don't need to raise your voice to take up space. So to every woman who's listening, stop rehearsing your worth. You don't need permission to exist loudly. You just need to begin. And if this story reached you, if even one sentence made you feel seen, then share it. Let it move through the world like a whisper turning into thunder. Because someone somewhere is still standing outside that door wondering if she should walk through. Tell her yes. Always yes.